Hi, welcome back to the PhotoshopTrainingChannel.com. I'm Jesus Ramirez. In this video, I'm going to show you the replay of an online presentation that I did for the Photoshop and Photography group on Facebook. This presentation is all about compositing, putting images together, and it's a presentation that I think that you're really going to enjoy because I'm going to reveal a lot of tips and tricks that I'm sure are going to be beneficial to your compositing work. So watch the video all the way to the end. There's a lot to learn. Okay, let's get started. Hey everybody, how's it going? This is Jesus Ramirez from the Photoshop Training Channel, and in this live stream for the Photoshop and Photography group, we're going to be talking about compositing. I'm gonna start by just giving you a little tour of my Behance page so you guys can see what type of compositing work that I do. And one of the pieces that I wanted to show you is this one here. And by the way, if you want to check out my Behance page, you can go to JR from PTC. So it's behance.net/JR from PTC. And the piece that I want to show you is the Adobe Stock Masterpiece. This is a project that I work with Adobe. I was one of 5 different artists that got hired to recreate a painting that has been lost to history, either by damage or theft. And this particular piece has 1,500 layers. It's 4.7 gigabytes and it took me about 80 hours to complete. It's made up of nothing but Adobe stock images, and it was composited together using Photoshop, of course. And if I scroll down, you'll see all the different images that I used to create the final image. So the original one is on the right, the recreation is on the left. And I'm going to scroll down so you can see some of the close-ups, and you can see all the detail that was added, including the canvas and these cracks on the paint, much like the original painting would have. And this is the real reason why I wanted to show you this particular piece, because it shows you the power of compositing in Photoshop. On the left, you'll see the Adobe stock images that I used, and on the right, you'll see what I did with them. So you can see there was a lot of compositing work, a lot of color matching, color swapping, matching lighting, all kinds of things to make this composite come alive. Also, in some pieces I had to get creative, so in this case I used a towel for the sleeves, and in this case I used a cat for the fur lining on the people's hats. So as you can see, this took a lot of work, but at the end it was worth it. And I have a small animation here that you can see of the composite coming together. So obviously this is a very complex composite, and we're going to work on something very simple today, but that simple composite will still show you a lot of the elements that you need to complete a composite like this. So we're going to talk about 5 different things, and I have it here in Photoshop. Let me bring that up really quick. We're going to talk a little bit about masking, perspective, color matching, blending modes, and cohesiveness, meaning making everything seem as like a single piece, make it cohesive. So that is one of the projects that I work for Adobe. And I also want to mention that if you are into Photoshop and compositing, always work on personal projects. So that's something I try to do as much as I can when I have time. And this is one of my personal projects. I'm a big fan of Spider-Man. A lot of you probably saw the new Spider-Man movie, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. So this composite was created based on that movie. And I'm going to scroll down so that you can see the images that I used to create that composite. So those images there were used to create this composite that you see here. So I'm just going to move on over to Photoshop. And once again, if you want to follow me on Behance, my handle is JR from PTC. You can also follow me on JR from PTC on Instagram. And as I mentioned, we're going to work with masking, perspective, color matching, blending modes, and cohesiveness in this stream. And this is the final composite that we're going to work with. I know that it may not seem super exciting, but trust me, this composite has all the elements that you're going to need to make composites like you saw on my Behance page. So I'm just going to open up a new file, and we're going to work with this file that has the 3 separate layers that we're going to use to create the composite that you saw. And the first thing that you want to do on almost every composite is figure out the perspective of the scene. Let me show you what I mean by perspective. Let me bring up another document. So every scene that you work with will have a ground plane in the sky. That doesn't necessarily mean the floor. It could be a table. It could be anything. It could. I mean by ground plane is where is the subject sitting. So it could be the ground, table. Even if the subject is on top of a building, it's still the ground plane that they're sitting on. So where is that ground plane? Important thing is where it meets the sky. So we can see the ground plane here and we can see the sky here. So that means that the horizon line is there where the ground plane meets the sky. Another way of finding the horizon line is by looking at all the objects in an image that have parallel converging lines and see where they meet. So in this case, with these cubes, the parallel converging lines meet, of course, on the horizon line, and that's what we're doing. We're following those converging lines to see where the horizon line is. There's also two-point perspective, where there's two vanishing points on the horizon line, and three-point perspective, where we have a third vanishing point above the horizon line, or it could be below. But the point is that there's still two vanishing points right on the horizon line. And that's really, really important because we need to make sure that everything is in perspective when we start compositing. And one other thing that I want to mention is that some of you may have heard that the horizon line is the eye level, and that's true. In the real world, if you're looking off into the distance, the horizon line would be where your eye level is. But in the case of a photo, that's where the lens was when the photo was captured. So you can think about it as simply where the ground plane meets the sky. And in this image, you can make a very, very good estimate of where the ground plane in the sky is. We can see the road, so that's the ground plane. The sky is back here, and you can just estimate and assume that the horizon line is right about there. You don't need to be 100% perfect, but you need to have a very good idea of where it is. You could also, in this case, follow the parallel converging lines of the scene, and you'll notice that they'll meet somewhere right about, actually that was not a very good one. They'll meet somewhere right about here, and this is probably just a little too high, but you'll see that they meet right around there, right around where where I placed that guide. So that's all you really need to know, that that's where the horizon line is. And the reason that you need to know that is because if you don't, then things don't look the way that they should. Let me show you what I mean by that. I have this example here of this beach and this man. And it's a very good composite in the sense that the masking is pretty good. The lighting matches, the color matches. He even has mud in his shoes. We have a nice shadow, and it's a very good composite. But the problem is that the longer that you look at this image, the more that the image doesn't feel right. It doesn't look right. You can tell that something is wrong. And if we analyze the image, we'll see that the background has a horizon line really high up, right above his head. You can see the ground plane here, and you can see the sky there. So where the ground plane meets the sky is obviously the horizon line. If we enable the composite layer here and click on the layer mask while holding shift, we can disable it. That's why you can see that red X, and you'll see that the horizon line of the foreground is much, much lower, just right above his knees. See that? This is the ground plane, and this is the sky, and this is where it meets. So clearly the perspective is not matching. So how can you fix it? Well, you can do one of two things. You can click and drag him up and place him so that the horizon line matches. Notice that just by doing that, the image just feels better. He feels more like he belongs there. The other option that you have is moving the horizon line down so that it matches. So in both cases, the image just looks and feels much better because the perspective matches. So that's the importance of perspective. I also want to point out that not every image will work or not every background will work with every foreground, because sometimes the perspectives are too different. So if I disable this layer and I follow all the converging lines in the scene, you'll see that, of course, the horizon line is roughly right in the center of the image, right about here, right in the center. So if I bring in the model, I know where his horizon line is right above his knees. So even though this matches and feels right, he's obviously still too big because the perspectives are so different. So you'll never really get to make this image work with this background, no matter how much we scale him, because if we scale him down and try to fit him into perspective, he's just not going to work. So just keep that in mind. However, this is also a valuable lesson in creating, maybe giants or people that are very, very tiny, just by putting opposite perspectives together, and then you'll get that effect. Like here, like in this case, he looks very, very tall. So that's one good way of adjusting perspective to make it, or using perspective to create scenes that work for you. But if you want to make something realistic, obviously this wouldn't be the case. So let me close this document, and now we're going to work with this runner layer, and we need to find her perspective. And it's also really easy. We can see the ground plane here, we can see the sky, and we can see these parallel converging lines right here. So then we can assume that the horizon line is right on her hip, more or less. So I can click and drag her up just a little bit. And actually, before I do that, I'm just going to mask her. And there's so many ways of masking. You can use the quick selection tool if you're in an older version of Photoshop, and click and drag to select her. But in Photoshop CC, if you're a member of the Creative Cloud, you have access to the select subject button. So when you click on that, Adobe Sensei, which is Adobe's artificial intelligence, will analyze the image and make a selection. It's not perfect by any means, but it gets you started on that selection. So I can just come in here by holding Alt, Option on the Mac, and clicking and dragging on these areas that I've missed, or that I want to subtract rather, and then click and drag on the areas that I want to add. And at this point in the game, I don't necessarily want to spend a lot of time fine-tuning the image, because I don't even know if I need to. Some of these pixels I may decide to not keep, or the mask doesn't need to be perfect because it will blend perfectly with the background. So at this point, I'm just making a quick rough selection and then clicking on the layer mask icon to subtract the background from the foreground. At this point, I can just click and drag and move her up, and maybe press Ctrl T, Command T to transform, and scale her down just so that she's not as big, and I'll place her right about here. And one of the things that I want to do is I want to use some of those original pixels for the reflections. So what I could do is simply select a soft brush, make sure that the hardness is set to 0, and just start painting with white, not black, to reveal. So white reveals and black conceals. So you can just start using these original pixels for the reflection. And that's something you want to do a lot in compositing. You want to try to use the original pixels as much as possible. And this is going to work for now. And actually, you know what? Maybe not. Let me just hide some pixels. I'm just going to make a smoother transition to invisible, like so. So that's before, and that's after. So now that we work with masking, we can start moving on to the next part, which is color matching. So we can see that the background has a lot of blue and the foreground does not, and it clearly looks fake because we need to have a better color match so that it looks more realistic. Now, before I show you how to do that, we're going to move on into a different file, and I'm going to show you a technique for white balancing a photo, but that technique is going to show us how to color match. So first I'll show you the white balance technique so you understand how that tool is used, and then I'm going to show you how we can use that tool to color match. So I'm going to open up a document, and I'm sure that you've seen a bunch of photos like this where they simply are just not color balanced correctly. And this can happen for many reasons, but the point is that you can fix it in Photoshop. And one of the ways of fixing it in Photoshop is by using the curves adjustment layer. And by default, when you hit auto, sometimes it doesn't give you the best results. And Photoshop has 4 different algorithms that you can use when you click on that auto button. If you want to change what the algorithm is, you can hold Alt, Option on the Mac, and click on auto, and it brings up this window. These are the 4 different algorithms. By default, you'll see enhance brightness and contrast, and you can click on the different algorithms to see how they affect the photo. In my opinion, find dark and light colors gives you a better result. So that's the one that I'll select. And I can also check snap neutral midtones and notice how the image was color matched. And it's finding the darkest color, which is black, and the brightest color, which is white. In other words, it's looking for the darkest pixel in the image, it makes it black, the brightest pixel in the image, and it makes it white, and then you get this result. And I'm going to click on Save as Defaults and press OK. So next time that I create a curves adjustment layer and click on Auto, I'll get that result, which works great. Now, this is not a perfect algorithm. Sometimes it doesn't give you the results that you're expecting. For example, in this image, if I go into the curves adjustment layer and click on Auto, you'll see that it gets better, but is not as good as the previous example. That's because Photoshop had a lot of trouble finding the neutral gray. And to find the neutral gray, you can click on the gray point eyedropper and just click on an area of the image that should be a neutral gray, like the brake path, and the image looks much better. Now, some of you may be thinking, why not just start with the neutral gray eyedropper and not click on Auto? If you do, the image looks a little washed out. So you do need to click on Auto to get the contrast right, and then click on the image to on the neutral gray to neutralize it. So I just want to show you what's going on behind the scenes. That way you understand what that algorithm is doing. So remember, the algorithm is called Find Dark and Light Colors. So what does that mean? Before that algorithm came around, way back when, in Photoshop, some of you that have been using it for a while, you might remember that you can white balance an image by simply going into each individual channel and just finding the darkest and brightest points of an image. This is the black point. This is the information in the image. So I'm finding the information here. I don't need to do it on the white point. Then in the green channel, I can do the same, just finding the dark and brightest points. In the blue channel, I have to do both the black point and the white point. So see how that gives me the same result I had earlier? And when I click on the gray point eyedropper, I neutralize the image. And I think it would have been a better example to show you on this image, because the image actually gets color corrected in this case. So I'll do it really quickly. I'll go into the red channel, and you can see that as I find the black point and white point, the image starts looking better, and much better on every single channel once I find the dark and bright points. So that's what that algorithm is doing basically. It's just finding the dark and light colors for you, and it makes them black and it makes them white. Now, with that knowledge, we can go into our composite here, and we can tell Photoshop to, instead of finding black and white, to find the darkest colors in this image and apply them to the runner. To do so, I'm going to go into the curves adjustment layer, click on this icon to clip it to the layer below. Clipping simply means that this adjustment layer will only adjust the layer below. So that's it. That's what that clip does. And that's what this arrow in the layers panel represents. So with this layer selected, I'm going to hit the Auto button by holding Alt. And I do not need neutral midtones because this image has a color cast, so I definitely don't need that. I do want to stay with the find dark and light colors and click on this black color swatch for the shadows, and then I can select what the darkest color of my image is. So if I select this really dark blue here, and actually I made a mistake. The image turned white. Why did it turn white? That's because I didn't properly select the right icon to work with. See how the white outline here, this white focus is on the layer mask? It needs to be on the actual curves adjustment layer. So if I click on the actual curves adjustment layer, notice how the focus changes. So if I do that again, when I click on this area, you'll see that it changes to this dark blue, and I can move it around if I need to. So I'm just going to move it around, just make it a little more blue, and press OK. And I can do the same for the highlights. I need to find an area like the snow here to represent my highlights, and press OK. Notice that it doesn't look very good, and that's because snap neutral midtones is checked. But once I uncheck that, it's going to look much better, and it's going to look more like the background. And I can keep fine-tuning it as much as I need, make it brighter, darker, whatever you think it needs, so that the image looks more realistic. And I think in this case I may need to go a little bit brighter on here. and press OK. I'll press OK one more time. Photoshop is going to ask you if you want to make these the default colors. You actually do not, because then next time you want to color correct something, you're going to be using these colors. So most of the times you're going to click no. And now you can use the RGB channel to give the image contrast and make it match the scene. One trick that I like using is creating a black and white adjustment layer so that we lose all the color in the scene and we can just see the luminance values. Then with the curves adjustment layer, I can just fine tune the image and try to make it look. If the image looks good in black and white, it'll look good in color. So I'm just trying to make it match, meaning that I want the darkest pixels on her to be similar to the darker pixels in the background. So something like this, I would say. Once I disable the black and white adjustment layer, notice how much better the foreground image looks. I just want to mention, since we're done with this section here, and I want to mention one really quickly, and Andrew, I know Andrew's going to talk about it more in the chat, but if you're interested in compositing and you want to take a deep dive into compositing, you can check out my premium tutorials at photoshoptrainingchannel.com/shop. And as I said, Andrew should be pasting the link in there somewhere. And I have a course on compositing. It's this one here. So it's about 5 hours long and I cover a whole bunch of things on compositing. I have transcripts available. You can watch the free sample video if you like. But if you're into compositing and you want to learn more, I do have a full 5-hour course on compositing in Photoshop. We talk about perspective, lights, shadows, a whole bunch of different things, reflections, almost anything you want to know about compositing. So if you're enjoying this stream, check it out. Also, there's going to be a discount code, and Andrew again will post that on the chat. And yeah, Andrew, I just saw that you posted the compositing course, and I'm sure you'll be posting the discount code. It's 10% off for the people watching this stream. But anyway, we have now found the perspective of the image, masked our model, applied a color match to make the model look more realistic, and now it's time to just fine-tune the image further. I'm going to press Control semicolon to disable the guide. Control semicolon enables and disables guides. And what I'm going to do now is zoom in just to show you some of the details that are missing. See how in the background we have a lot of snow coming in and we don't necessarily see that on her? Well, obviously this is not realistic, so we need to make sure that we get some snow on her. And there's a lot of ways that you can add snow into Photoshop. One of the ways that I prefer is simply by going into the internet and finding an image. I like to use Adobe Stock, and from the libraries panel you can search on Adobe Stock and you can just type something like snow overlay, and you're gonna get all these different overlays from Adobe Stock that you can use on your image. Obviously you need to license those images, but I already have one license here from Adobe Stock. So I have this snow image, and when you're doing this, find something that has white snow or rain or whatever it is. The point is that you need white and then black in the background so that it's easier to composite. And I'm just going to click and rotate this layer so that the snow sort of matches the snow in the scene. Maybe even make it a little larger. Oops, sorry about that. Let me undo that. Maybe make it a little larger and just place it right there. And I want the snow to only affect the model, so I'm going to press Control-Alt-G, Command-Option-G on the Mac to clip it to the model, like so. And now I need to hide the black pixels and only keep the white pixels. And to do so, you can click on this drop-down and just use blending modes. And we have all these different blending modes that blend layers together. The darken group, see how these lines are in between certain blending modes? Those are groups. So normal group, darken group. The darken group obviously makes things darker. And the lighten group will obviously make things brighter. And the blending mode that you're looking for is screen, this one here. So notice how the black background disappears and we only keep the foreground. See that? Now, obviously, we need to make a couple adjustments, like the snow is way too sharp. So let me just go into Filter, Blur, Gaussian blur and blur it a little bit just because I'm trying to match the blur of the actual snow in the scene. And you know what? I think I may have made the snow way too large. So let me transform it, and actually I'll go the opposite way this time. I'll make it way smaller. Maybe something like this. And that's looking a little more like the snow in the scene. And what I'll do now is I'll just apply a image adjustment, hue and saturation adjustment so that I can make the snow bluish like the snow in the scene, something like this, and press OK, and maybe bring down the opacity just a little bit. And obviously this will take some fine-tuning, but you can see that right away we made the snow look a lot like the snow in the scene just by using that snow overlay. So you can use these overlays to get you can use Adobe Stock to get overlays. And actually I just thought about something that I'm going to show you. Let me just look for my Creative Cloud app. Adobe Stock, you obviously have to license images, which means you have to pay to use them. But if you want free assets from Adobe, if you're a member of the Creative Cloud, the full Creative Cloud, unfortunately not the photography plan, but the full Creative Cloud, you can go into the Assets tab on your Creative Cloud app, and you have this tab here called Market, which allows you to download user interfaces, vectors, icons, patterns, and brushes. So for example, I can go into brushes and I can type something like, we'll try a fog brush. We'll see if we can find one. And you want the brushes, and we have some fog brushes here. So I haven't used these before, so we'll see how they work. So I think I like this one here, smoke brush number 3. Actually, no, number 2. We'll use number 2. And we'll click on this icon to send it to my downloads folder. Actually, I'll put it in my tutorials folder. I'll put it in my tutorials folder, and it's downloading. It should be on there pretty soon. And let me just go into my libraries panel, go into my tutorials folder, and let me just delete that. And you can see the brushes here. And there it is. This is the one that I just brought in. So I can just double click on it, and the brush tool automatically selects it. There it is. And in a new layer, I can start painting with that brush. So that's what that brush looks like. Obviously, yellow is not the right color, so maybe I want to add a little bit of fog in here, a little bit of smoke. So maybe I could do it with like a light blue or something like that. And I'll try it again and just paint in some of that smoke, and obviously adjust the opacity and things like that, just to bring in some of this mist, some of this smoke or fog rather. And there it is. So that's before and after. But the point is that you have to, you can use the Adobe Creative Cloud app under Assets and under Market to find all these different brushes of any kind, and also the icon. So maybe you're working on a design and you're looking for, I don't know, the Facebook icon, since we're on Facebook. Let's see what they got. I guess they don't have a lot of things on Facebook on here. I think if you type in social media, actually something may come up, like on one of those packs. Let's see, social media. Yeah, so if you type in social media, you can get these packs that have those icons and then use them for whatever you need to. So we have the like button, Pinterest, and all these different things. So all these assets are free and you can use them on your projects. All right, so now that we have all these layers together, or not together, I want to put all these layers together just to control them as a single image. So that's the cohesiveness part of the image. We've talked about masking, perspective, color matching, blending modes, and now we're going to do cohesiveness. And what I like to do once I have my composite more or less in this part, I like to just put all my layers together. So I'm going to hold Shift and click on the bottom layer and then the top layer, and it selects them all. And then right click and select Convert to Smart Object. And this is going to put the entire composite into a smart object. If I double click on it, it opens up in a new tab and I can edit it. For now, I'm just going to work with the smart object. And what I'm going to do is go into Filter, Camera Raw Filter, and I can adjust this composite as a single layer. So I can maybe make it cooler. I could adjust the shadows, make them darker, maybe add clarity, which is contrast in the midtones, to make it pop and seem a little more grungy. Maybe use the vibrance, which is smart saturation. It adds saturation to pixels that are not already saturated, and it protects skin tones. And I also want to sharpen the image. So when I sharpen the image, I really can't tell what I'm sharpening. And you always want to sharpen at 100% so that you can really see what's going on. Any other zoom level will be misleading and it won't give you a right representation of the sharpening. So when you increase sharpening, you obviously sharpen the entire image, right? But Photoshop allows you to mask the sharpening by using the masking slider. Now when you drag it to the right, you can't really see what's going on. But if you hold Alt, Option on the Mac, you'll see that the screen turns white. Just like a layer mask, white reveals and black conceals. If I drag it to the right, you can see how the image starts getting darker. So in those dark areas, we will not apply the sharpening effect. So back here in the fog, I don't really want any sharpening there. So I can drag it to the right and completely hide the sharpening effect from that area. So the sharpening effect will only be applied to the areas in white, which are the edges of the image. So now if I bump it all the way up to 150, it doesn't look as bad. So you can fine tune it and you get the right sharpening for your image. I also want to go into the Effects tab and add a little bit of grain. So if you zoom in, you'll notice that the background has some grain, but it doesn't really match the foreground. So that would be a little bit unrealistic. So I'll just add a little bit of grain to both, just so that we can match the grain a bit better. And I'm gonna fit this in the view and also add a vignette and increase the highlights. Highlight simply means that the dark vignette won't affect the bright pixels. And then I'll press OK. So you can see the before and the after. Also, if I want to make an edit to those camera raw adjustments, I can double click on the camera raw filter label and it brings it back up and I can make any adjustment that I want. Or if I want to make an adjustment on the actual composite, I can double click on the smart object and make my adjustment. For example, I can move the model here to the right. Actually, right about here is probably what it would look, where it would look best. And then press Control S, Command S on the Mac to save. And notice how the smart object updated and all those camera raw filters were applied to the adjustment that I made. So it's a really great way. When you composite in Photoshop, you should be working non-destructively so that you can make adjustments at a later point. And the reason you want to make adjustments is because if you have a client that decides that they want to change, it's easier for you to change. If you're working for yourself or it's a fun project, it's a personal project, then you may change your mind at a later date and it allows you the flexibility to make these changes. So working non-destructively is key when working with composites in Photoshop. I'm going to take a quick break. I'd like to remind you that you can go into my website, photoshoptrainingchannel.com, and check out my Compositing course. It's 5 hours long where I talk about a whole bunch of different things. You can see the index here. You can get a free sample if you want. I have transcripts for every video. There's PDFs and the files so you can work with them. So check them out. Check it out if you want. Andrew will place the link to the page on the chat, and he's also got a discount code in case you're interested of getting this course. So let's get back into Photoshop. Let me go ahead and close these files since we don't need them anymore, and I got a couple other things I want to show you. So I'm going to show you a different way of compositing, and what I mean by that is, let me just show you these images. These are photos that I took in the Louvre Museum in Paris, France, and as you can see, there's people walking through them. So I'll just open one so you can see them. So there's a whole bunch of people walking through the scene, and I want to remove everybody. And obviously I can use things like content aware and things like, you know, cloning. And let me just quickly show you what I mean by that. So, you know, one of the things I could use, and I don't know how well this is going to work, but I could use content aware, right? There's a new one and the old one. I'll just show you the old one for now just because it's easier to explain. So if I hold Shift and Backspace, I can let Photoshop try to fill that in, and that may or may not work. Or I could use something like the patch tool and, you know, try to match it from another area and see if that works, and, you know, keep using patches and, you know, try to remove everyone in the scene. And obviously that will take forever. So if you're ever in a situation like this where you have a scene that you want, but there's a lot of people walking through, Photoshop actually gives you the capability of compositing images together and then apply an algorithm to keep or remove certain pixels depending on the algorithm. And what I did is I took 14 different photos of this museum, and in Photoshop I can put them all in really, really easily. So if I go into filter, file, scripts, statistics, I can go into the folder here under use, click on browse, and under my Louvre Museum, I can select that, and it's going to load all those files into Photoshop. Then I can select the stack mode. This is the algorithm. And the algorithm that I want is median. Median simply means look at all the images and keep the constant pixels and get rid of the not constant pixels. So in a scene like that one, people are walking through, so those people are not constant because they're moving. The buildings are obviously constant, so it'll keep the buildings. Usually want to do this with a camera and a tripod. I didn't have a camera or a tripod. I had my cell phone and no tripod. So what I had to do was hold very, very still and take these photos roughly 20-30 seconds apart. You have to keep an eye out and make sure that everybody moves, because if you have a group of people standing there not moving, then obviously they're going to stay. So you do have to keep an eye out for those kinds of things, but just take your photos, wait a few seconds, and take a few more photos. And the number of photos really depends on the scene. I would just take as many as possible and then see what works in Photoshop. In this case, 14 was the right number, and I'll just press OK. So you'll notice that Photoshop is going to load all those images into the layers panel, and then it's going to attempt to align them since I was moving, remember? And then it's going to apply that algorithm. And notice how really, really quickly Photoshop just removed everyone from the scene, just like that, just like magic. Now, it's not perfect. If I zoom in, you'll see that there's a couple imperfections. See that? Like that person right there, that's somebody's arm. I can just create a new layer. And with the spot healing brush tool, I can just click and drag and remove that arm from the image. And I know there's a couple more. There's one here. Really, really easy to remove now. And that there. Very easy. And you can see that the job that Photoshop did. Now the problem is that the clouds were moving. So since the clouds were moving, we got this really, really weird effect. That's really easy to fix. We can double click on the smart object to open up the tab, and we can simply use these clouds to fix the mistake. But see that? See how the clouds are moving? That's why we got that weird cloud effect. So I'm gonna just select the clouds with the rectangular marquee tool, go to edit, copy, and then go back into the working document, edit, paste special, paste in place, and we have the sky back. We do have a seam right here in the pyramid, but with a layer mask, I can paint with black using a soft brush and remove that seam before and after. Then I can put all these layers together by holding shift on the top layer, holding shift on the bottom layer, right clicking and selecting convert to smart object, and we'll do what we did in the previous example. Treat it as a single image with the camera raw filter. And I'm going to create this HDR effect by reducing the highlights, increasing the shadows, adding a whole bunch of clarity, which is contrast in the midtones. I'll increase the vibrance as well, and I'll add a little bit of sharpening and press OK. Then I'll crop the edges. The edges look black because the images were not aligned properly. Remember that I was using my hands to hold the camera, so I'm obviously breathing, moving a little bit, so that's why you get that effect in the corners. But you can click and drag the handles here with the crop tool to crop those corners, and I can just rotate it to straighten the horizon and just match it as best as or just crop it as best as I can, like so. And actually I think that I might have rotated it a little too much. Maybe a little bit less, like that. And that's the final image. So really, really quickly we were able to composite all those images and get this really, really cool effect really fast. So we are going to be finishing the stream in just a couple moments. I'm going to go back and look at the chat and see if there's any questions. Feel free to ask any question and I'll try to answer it. But keep in mind we only have about 5 or so minutes, so let me know. And I'm looking at the chat now. Somebody said I want the lesson about masking. If I'm not mistaken, I did a lesson on masking about 2 years ago on this group, and it should be in the recording somewhere. I don't know if Andrew has access to that, but Andrew, if you have access to the old recordings I've done on this group, I did one on masking, I think, so you might want to place the link there. Everybody's saying, wow, nice, miracle. Yeah, it's really cool. It's a really cool technique, and I really, really like it. Also, if you're on Instagram, I'm at JR from PTC. Follow me on Instagram there. And don't forget about my Photoshop Compositing course. It's on my website. Andrew's been pasting the link in the description, or in the chat there. And you can check it out. There's also a discount code, and I talk about all kinds of things, including perspective, reflections, lights, and all these different things. So I would recommend it if you really want to get into compositing in Photoshop. And that's it for this tutorial. I hope that you enjoyed it and that you learned something new. If you're interested in the compositing course, I'm going to place a link down below in the description with the coupon code, so you can also get the same discount that the people got when they watched the live presentation. And if this is your first time at the Photoshop training channel, then don't forget to click on that subscribe and notification buttons. Thank you so much for watching. I will talk to you again in the next tutorial.